The boardroom fell silent as I walked through those mahogany doors. 23 pairs of eyes followed my every step, some curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. At 28 years old, I was about to become the youngest female general manager in the history of Blackstone Defense Corporation, one of America's largest military contracting firms. But the irony wasn't lost on me. The same family members who had written me off as a failure just 5 years earlier were now desperately trying to reach my assistant for meetings. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in the south side of Chicago, the Patterson household operated under one simple rule. Expectations were reserved for those who showed promise, and I apparently didn't qualify. My older brother Marcus was the golden child, quarterback of the high school football team, straight A's, full scholarship to Northwestern University. My younger sister Elena possessed an artistic talent that had local galleries fighting over her work before she turned 16. Then there was me, Sarah Patterson, the middle child who seemed destined for mediocrity in everyone's eyes. My father, Robert Patterson, worked double shifts at the Ford assembly plant, while my mother, Diane, managed the books for 3 small businesses in our neighborhood. They weren't wealthy, but they were hardworking people who believed success came to those who earned it. The problem was, they couldn't see how I planned to earn mine. While Marcus threw touchdown passes and Elena painted masterpieces, I spent my afternoons in our basement, taking apart old radios, computer monitors, and anything electronic I could get my hands on. My parents saw this as destructive behavior rather than curiosity. Sarah's breaking things again became a common refrain around our dinner table, usually followed by lengthy lectures about responsibility and focus. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had been working on a project for months, a modified radio system that could boost signal strength by 40% using salvaged components. I was convinced this could be my ticket to a good engineering program, maybe even a scholarship. The night before the science fair, I stayed up until 3 in the morning perfecting the final calibrations. I woke up to find my creation in pieces. My mother had thrown it away, thinking it was more of my electronic junk cluttering up the basement. When I confronted her, tears streaming down my face, her response cut deeper than I expected. "Sarah, honey, you need to face reality. You're 18 years old and you still haven't figured out what you're good at. Marcus has his football, Elena has her art, but you just make messes. Maybe it's time to consider community college and a practical career. There's nothing wrong with being ordinary." The science fair went on without me. I watched from the back of the gymnasium as other students presented their projects to judges from local universities. My physics teacher, Mr. Hendricks, approached me afterward with a confused expression. "Sarah, where's your radio project? I've been telling everyone about it for weeks. The representatives from Illinois Institute of Technology were specifically asking to see it." I mumbled something about technical difficulties and left early. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was going to prove everyone wrong, starting with myself. The college application process became my obsession. While my parents pushed for the local community college, I secretly applied to 15 engineering programs across the country. I worked 3 part-time jobs that summer: morning shifts at a diner, afternoons at an electronics repair shop, and night stocking shelves at a grocery store. Every penny went toward application fees and saving for college. The acceptance letter from Virginia Tech arrived on a Tuesday in March. I had been accepted into their aerospace engineering program with a partial scholarship. When I showed my parents, their reaction was lukewarm at best. "Virginia? That's awfully far from home," my mother said, barely looking up from her crossword puzzle. "And aerospace engineering? Sarah, be realistic. How many women actually succeed in that field? Maybe you should consider something more suitable." My father was more direct. "The scholarship only covers 60%. Where do you think the rest of that money is going to come from? We've already stretched ourselves thin helping Marcus with Northwestern. And Elena's art supplies aren't cheap. Sometimes you have to know your limitations." But I had made up my mind. I took out student loans for the remaining costs, despite my parents' warnings about debt. The night before I left for Blacksburg, Virginia, my family gathered for what they called a farewell dinner, though it felt more like a funeral. "Well, Sarah," my father said, raising his beer in a half-hearted toast, "I hope this works out for you. But remember, There's no shame in coming home if it doesn't. Your room will still be here. Marcus, home for spring break, was more blunt. Look, sis, I love you, but mom and dad have a point. Engineering is brutal, especially for girls. The dropout rate is insane. Maybe you should have a backup plan. Even Elena, usually my ally, seemed doubtful. I just don't want you to get your hopes up too high. You've never really finished anything big before. That night, I packed my few belongings into 2 suitcases and a backpack. As I closed my bedroom door for what I assumed would be the last time in a while, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. She's setting herself up for disappointment, my mother was saying. Sarah's always been a dreamer, but this is different. What happens when she fails out and comes crawling back home with $30,000 in debt? Maybe failure will teach her something, my father replied. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way. I left for Virginia Tech the next morning with $800 in my checking account, a determination that bordered on desperation, and absolutely no support from the people who were supposed to believe in me most. The first semester nearly broke me. Calculus 2, physics for engineers, chemistry, and computer programming filled my days while I worked nights at the campus library to cover basic expenses. My roommate, Jennifer Walsh from Connecticut, came from a family of engineers who had prepared her for this academic intensity her entire life. While she video called her parents every Sunday for help with homework, I struggled through problems alone in the corner of our dorm room. Don't you ever call your parents for help? Jennifer asked one night as I wrestled with a particularly complex differential equation. They wouldn't understand the problems, I replied, which was both true and a massive understatement. The loneliness was almost unbearable. I watched other students form study groups and friendships while I remained on the periphery, too proud to admit I was struggling, and too afraid that asking for help would confirm everyone's doubts about my capabilities. My grades reflected this isolation, B's and C's where I needed A's to maintain my scholarship. The wake-up call came in November when I received a letter from the financial aid office. My GPA had dropped below the scholarship threshold. Unless I could bring my grades up by the end of the semester, I would lose the funding that made my education possible. That night, I called home for the first time since orientation. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. Sarah? Oh, honey, what's wrong? It's almost midnight there. Mom, I'm having some trouble with my classes. The material is harder than I expected, and I'm worried about my scholarship. There was a long pause before she responded. Oh, sweetheart. I was afraid this might happen. Your father and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time to consider other options. You could transfer to Chicago State, live at home, maybe study something more manageable. There's no shame in it. But Mom, I'm not ready to give up. I just need to figure out a better approach. Sarah, sometimes the most mature thing to do is recognize when something isn't working. You've given it a good try, but maybe this just isn't meant to be. After I hung up, I sat in my dorm room staring at my textbooks. For a moment, I considered taking her advice. It would be so easy to pack up, go home, and settle into the ordinary life everyone expected of me. But something deeper pushed back against that impulse. The next morning, I did something that felt completely foreign. I asked for help. I approached Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, my calculus professor, during her office hours. Professor Morrison, I'm struggling with the material, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my scholarship. I know I'm not the strongest student in your class, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone if you can point me in the right direction. Dr. Morrison, a woman in her 50s, who had clearly faced her own battles in the male-dominated field of mathematics, studied me for a long moment. Sarah, I've been watching you this semester. You sit in the back, you never ask questions, and you turn in homework that shows you're working twice as hard as most students to get half the results. But there's something else I've noticed. You approach problems differently than your classmates. Where they follow formulas, you try to understand underlying principles. That's actually a strength, but you need to learn how to leverage it. She spent the next hour teaching me study techniques that played to my analytical strengths, rather than forcing me to memorize formulas. More importantly, she introduced me to a study group of upperclassmen who welcomed new members regardless of their current grade point average. The secret, she told me as I gathered my books to leave, isn't being the smartest person in the room, it's being the most persistent. Those words became my mantra. I restructured my entire approach to college, forming genuine connections with classmates, professors, and teaching assistants. I learned to ask questions without feeling stupid, and to offer help to others when I could. My grades began to climb, slowly at first, then more dramatically. By the end of freshman year, I had not only saved my scholarship, but earned a 3.7 GPA for the spring semester. More importantly, I had discovered something about myself that no one back home had ever recognized. I had an intuitive understanding of how complex systems worked, whether they were mathematical equations or electronic circuits. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But the real test would come that summer when I returned to Chicago for break. I had changed, but my family's expectations of me hadn't. Summer 2018 arrived with the kind of Chicago heat that made concrete shimmer and tempers flare. I stepped off the Greyhound bus at Union Station carrying a duffel bag, a laptop case, and grades that told a story my family wasn't prepared to hear. The Sarah who had left 10 months earlier with doubt and desperation had been replaced by someone who understood her own capabilities. The Patterson household looked exactly the same peeling paint on the front porch, same broken screen door that squeaked when you opened it, same pile of Marcus's football trophies gathering dust on the mantel. But the dynamic shifted the moment I walked through that familiar doorway. "Well, look who decided to come home," my mother said, not looking up from her soap opera. "How bad were the grades? Your father's been preparing the 'I told you so' speech for weeks." I placed my transcript on the coffee table between us. 3.7 cumulative GPA Dean's List both semesters. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. My mother picked up the paper, studied it, then handed it to my father, who had emerged from the kitchen with a confused expression. "This can't be right," he muttered, adjusting his reading glasses. "Sarah, are you sure this is yours?" The question stung more than any insult they had ever thrown at me. Even presented with concrete evidence of my success, their first instinct was to assume I was lying or had somehow received someone else's grades by mistake. Marcus wandered downstairs at that moment, fresh from his morning workout. He was home for the summer between his junior and senior years at Northwestern, where his football scholarship was paying for a business degree he was coasting through with minimal effort. "Hey sis, Mom said you might be transferring back to Chicago State. Probably for the best. Engineering was always going to be too much for you." I handed him my transcript without saying a word. His expression shifted from casual dismissal to genuine surprise, then something that looked almost like resentment. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I guess community college prepared you better than we thought." "I didn't go to community college, Marcus. This is from Virginia Tech's Aerospace Engineering program." The room fell silent again. Elena chose that moment to bounce down the stairs, paint still smudged on her fingertips from whatever masterpiece she was working on that day. "Sarah, you're back. How was college? Did you love it? Tell me everything." At 19, Elena remained the only family member who had ever shown genuine enthusiasm for my pursuits. Her innocent excitement stood in stark contrast to the skeptical atmosphere that had filled the room moments before. "It was challenging but incredible," I told her, meaning every word. "I learned more about myself in 9 months than I had in the previous 18 years. Over dinner that night, the conversation remained awkward and stilted. My parents asked perfunctory questions about my classes and living situation, but I could sense their discomfort with my answers. They had prepared for me to return home defeated and ready to accept their version of reality. Instead, I was describing advanced physics concepts, research opportunities, and professors who believed in my potential. The real tension emerged when I announced my summer plans. Instead of working at one of the local shops or restaurants like previous years, I had secured an internship at Garrett Motion, an automotive technology company based in Downers Grove. The position involved working with turbocharger design teams to optimize performance algorithms. "An internship?" my father asked, pronouncing the word like it was foreign. "Don't they usually save those for upperclassmen?" "Normally, yes. But Professor Morrison recommended me to one of her former students who works there. They were looking for someone with strong analytical skills and a fresh perspective." "How much does it pay?" my mother wanted to know. $15 an hour, plus transportation allowance." Marcus nearly choked on his mashed potatoes. "15 an hour? For an 18-year-old? That's more than Dad makes at the plant. The comparison hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. My father's jaw tightened, and I immediately regretted mentioning the wage. But the damage was done. For the first time in my life, I was earning more respect and compensation than the people who had always looked down on me. The internship at Garrett Motion transformed my understanding of what was possible. My supervisor, Dr. Amanda Chen, was a 34-year-old mechanical engineer who had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer brilliance and relentless work ethic. She became the mentor I hadn't known I needed. "Sarah," she told me during my first week, "I've reviewed your academic transcript and your preliminary assessments. You have something that can't be taught, an intuitive grasp of system integration. Most engineers see individual components. You see how everything connects." The project she assigned me involved analyzing turbocharger efficiency data to identify patterns that might lead to performance improvements. What started as a simple data analysis task evolved into something much more significant when I discovered an algorithmic approach that could increase fuel efficiency by 12%. "This is remarkable work," Dr. Chen said, reviewing my findings after 3 weeks. "I'm going to present this to the senior engineering team. If they approve it for further development, you'll be credited as the primary researcher." The presentation took place in a conference room filled with engineers who had decades of experience and advanced degrees from prestigious universities. I was the only intern, the only teenager, and the only person in the room who had grown up believing she wasn't smart enough to be there. Dr. Chen introduced my research with genuine enthusiasm. "Sarah Patterson, our summer intern from Virginia Tech, has identified an optimization strategy that could revolutionize our approach to fuel efficiency algorithms." For the next 30 minutes, I explained my methodology, answered technical questions, and defended my conclusions against challenges from senior staff members. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in discussion about implementation timelines and patent applications. Dr. William Foster, the department director, approached me afterward with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Miss Patterson, how old are you?" 19, sir." "And you developed this analysis independently?" "Yes, sir. Dr. Chen provided guidance on company protocols and data access, but the algorithmic approach was my own." He nodded slowly. "I've been in this industry for 22 years, and I've never seen an intern produce work of this caliber. We're going to fast-track this research for patent application, and you'll be listed as the primary inventor." The news reached my family through Elena, who had been following my internship progress with enthusiastic interest. She burst into the house that evening while I was helping my mother with dinner preparations. "Sarah, tell them about the patent thing. Tell them what Dr. Chen said." My parents looked up expectantly, and I found myself in the strange position of having to explain intellectual property law to people who still saw me as their unsuccessful middle child. "The company is applying for a patent on an algorithm I developed to improve turbocharger efficiency. If approved, it could be implemented across their entire product line." My father set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "A patent? At 19? That seems unlikely." "It's happening, Dad." Dr. Chen showed me the preliminary paperwork yesterday. Marcus emerged from the living room where he had been scrolling through his phone. "Wait, you're telling me that little Sarah might have her name on an actual patent? Like, a real one that companies pay money for?" The disbelief in his voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But underneath the skepticism, I detected something else. A hint of envy that he was trying desperately to hide. The patent application process took 8 weeks to complete. During that time, I continued working at Garrett Motion while preparing for my sophomore year at Virginia Tech. Dr. Chen had offered me a part-time position during the school year, allowing me to continue contributing to research projects remotely. But the real validation came in late July, when Dr. Chen called me into her office with news that would change everything. "Sarah, I've been invited to present our efficiency research at the International Conference on Automotive Engineering in Detroit next month. The conference organizers have specifically requested that you co-present the technical findings." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to present at a professional conference? In front of industry experts?" "Not just present, you'll be the lead presenter for the technical segment. This research is yours, and you deserve the recognition." The International Conference on Automotive Engineering was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Engineers, researchers, and executives from around the world gathered to share cutting-edge developments in automotive technology. I was scheduled to present during the prime afternoon slot on the second day of the conference. Standing behind that podium, looking out at an audience of 300 industry professionals, I thought about the basement in Chicago, where I had taken apart my first radio. I thought about my mother throwing away my science fair project. I thought about my father's assumption that I would fail and come crawling home, where the presentation went flawlessly. My research generated immediate interest from representatives of Ford, General Motors, and Tesla. By the end of the day, I had business cards from 12 different companies expressing interest in collaboration or future employment opportunities. But the moment that truly changed my trajectory came during the networking reception that evening. I was standing near the refreshment table, trying to process the day's events, when a woman in her 50s approached me with a warm smile. "Miss Patterson? I'm Rebecca Harrison, Chief Technology Officer at Blackstone Defense Corporation. I attended your presentation this afternoon, and I have to say, your work is extraordinary." Blackstone Defense Corporation. I knew the name from business magazines and news articles. They were one of the largest military contractors in the United States, specializing in advanced weapons systems and defense technology. Thank you, Ms. Harrison. I'm honored that you found it interesting. Interesting doesn't begin to cover it. Your algorithmic approach to system optimization could have applications far beyond automotive engineering. Have you ever considered defense technology as a career path? I hadn't, actually. My focus had been primarily on civilian applications for engineering research. But the way Ms. Harrison described the challenges facing modern defense contractors intrigued me. The military is facing unprecedented technological challenges, she continued. We need engineers who can think outside traditional frameworks, who can see connections that others miss. Based on what I saw today, I believe you might be exactly what our industry needs. She handed me her business card and made an offer that left me speechless. I'd like to invite you to visit our facility in Arlington next month. We have a summer fellowship program for exceptional students, and I think you'd find our work fascinating. The fellowship pays $30,000 for 8 weeks of research, plus housing and transportation. $30,000 for 8 weeks of work. The amount was more than my parents made in 6 months combined. Pay search. That night, I called Elena from my hotel room in Detroit. She was the only family member I trusted to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Elena, something incredible just happened, but I need to tell someone who won't immediately assume I'm exaggerating." "Tell me everything," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. When I finished explaining the day's events, she was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, do you realize what this means? You're 19 years old and defense contractors are recruiting you. This is huge." "I know, but I'm scared to get too excited. What if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not as good as they think I am?" "Listen to me," Elena said with more seriousness than I had ever heard from her. "You've spent your entire life being told you weren't good enough. But look at what's happened in the past year. Maybe it's time to start believing what the evidence is telling you instead of what everyone else has been saying." Her words hit me like a physical force. For the first time, I began to consider the possibility that everyone who had doubted me, including myself, might have been wrong. The Blackstone Defense Corporation facility in Arlington, Virginia, looked like something from a science fiction movie. Glass towers stretched toward the sky, housing laboratories where the future of military technology was being developed behind layers of security clearance and classified protocols. Walking through those gates for the first time in August 2018, I felt like an imposter wearing a visitor's badge that seemed too big for my shirt collar. Rebecca Harrison met me in the main lobby, her confident stride and sharp business suit making it clear why she had risen to become Chief Technology Officer of a Fortune 500 defense contractor. She led me through a maze of corridors filled with engineers hunched over computer workstations, their screens displaying weapons system schematics and satellite imagery that I wasn't supposed to see. "Sarah, welcome to the future of national defense," she said, stopping in front of a massive window overlooking the main research floor. "What you're looking at down there represents $3 billion in annual research and development. These teams are working on everything from hypersonic missile guidance systems to autonomous battlefield logistics." The fellowship program turned out to be unlike anything I had experienced in civilian engineering. My project involved developing optimization algorithms for drone swarm coordination, essentially teaching hundreds of unmanned aerial vehicles to work together as a single tactical unit. The mathematical complexity was staggering, requiring me to blend aerospace engineering principles with advanced computer science and military strategy. My supervisor, Dr. Michael Torres, was a former Air Force colonel who had transitioned to defense contracting after 20 years of military service. He possessed the rare combination of practical battlefield experience and advanced technical expertise that made him invaluable to Blackstone's research division. Most engineers approach drone coordination like a traffic management problem, he explained during our first project meeting. They focus on preventing collisions and maintaining formation. But military applications require something entirely different: adaptive intelligence that can respond to enemy countermeasures in real time. The challenge he presented seemed impossible at first. How do you program artificial intelligence that can think strategically while managing hundreds of individual aircraft operating in hostile environments? Traditional algorithms broke down when faced with the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat scenarios. But as I dove deeper into the problem, I began to see patterns that others had missed. Instead of trying to control every aspect of drone behavior, I developed a decentralized approach that allowed individual units to make autonomous decisions within defined parameters. The swarm could adapt to changing conditions without requiring constant communication with a central command system. 3 weeks into the fellowship, my algorithm passed its first simulation test. Dr. Torres called me into his office with an expression that mixed excitement with disbelief. "Sarah, I've been running defense simulations for 15 years, and I've never seen results like this. Your swarm coordination system just outperformed our current military standard by 47%. We need to scale this up for full testing immediately." The full-scale testing took place at a classified facility in Nevada that I'm still not allowed to discuss in detail. What I can say is that my algorithm controlled a swarm of 80 autonomous drones through a series of increasingly complex tactical scenarios. The results exceeded every performance benchmark that Blackstone had established for drone coordination technology. Dr. Harrison was present for the final demonstration, along with representatives from the Department of Defense and several high-ranking military officials whose names I recognized from news reports. Watching my code control a squadron of military drones felt surreal. 18 months earlier, my own mother had thrown away my science fair project because she thought I was wasting time on electronic junk. After the demonstration concluded, Dr. Harrison pulled me aside for a conversation that would alter the trajectory of my career. "Sarah, what you've accomplished in 8 weeks typically takes our senior research teams 18 months to develop. The Pentagon is already asking about implementation timelines for your swarm coordination system." She paused, studying my reaction before continuing. "I'm going to make you an offer that might seem premature, but I believe you're ready for it. We want you to join Blackstone as a full-time research engineer after you graduate. We're prepared to offer you a starting salary of $95,000, plus security clearance and access to classified projects that represent the cutting edge of military technology." $95,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. My father's annual salary at the Ford plant was $38,000. In a single conversation, I was being offered the opportunity to earn more than twice what he made, working on projects that could influence national security policy. But the offer came with complications that I hadn't anticipated. Accepting a position at Blackstone would require extensive background investigations, polygraph examinations, and security clearances that would fundamentally change how I lived my life. More importantly, it would cement my path into an industry that many of my college friends viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. The conversation I had with Elena that night revealed the depth of the decision I was facing. "Sarah, this is incredible, but are you sure this is what you want?" Defense contracting isn't exactly the most popular career choice among our generation. She had a point. Many of my peers at Virginia Tech were drawn to engineering because they wanted to solve environmental problems, develop renewable energy systems, or create technology that improved civilian life. Working for a military contractor carried moral implications that I hadn't fully considered. "I keep thinking about Dr. Torres and what he told me about serving his country," I replied. "These technologies aren't just weapons, they're tools that protect American soldiers and civilians." If I can develop systems that bring troops home safely, isn't that worthwhile? Elena was quiet for a moment before responding. You're the only one who can answer that question. But I will say this. You're finally in a position where people are recognizing your abilities and offering you real opportunities. Don't let other people's opinions talk you out of something that feels right to you. Returning to Virginia Tech for my sophomore year felt like stepping backward in time. My dorm room, my classes, even my friendships seemed smaller somehow after spending 8 weeks working on classified military projects. The disconnect between my academic coursework and the real-world applications I had experienced at Blackstone created a restlessness that I struggled to manage. The secret clearance investigation began in October, requiring me to document every aspect of my life history for federal investigators. They interviewed my high school teachers, my college professors, my neighbors from Chicago, and even my supervisor from the grocery store where I had worked 3 years earlier. The process felt invasive and thorough, in ways that reinforced the seriousness of the career path I was considering. The most difficult interview was with my own family. A federal investigator showed up at the Patterson household on a Tuesday afternoon, asking detailed questions about my character, my loyalties, and my potential vulnerabilities to foreign influence. My parents later told me they felt like they were being interrogated about a daughter they barely recognized. The man asked if we thought you were capable of handling classified information responsibly, my mother reported during our weekly phone call. I didn't know what to say. Sarah, we still don't understand what you're doing or why the government is so interested in you. The security clearance process took 6 months to complete, during which I maintained my academic performance while working remotely on Blackstone projects that I couldn't discuss with anyone. The isolation was profound. I was developing cutting-edge technology that could reshape modern warfare, but I couldn't share the excitement or challenges with my closest friends. The clearance approval came through in March 2019, along with an invitation to spend spring break at Blackstone, working on an urgent project that Dr. Harrison described as, quote, to national security interests. The project involved adapting my drone swarm algorithms for naval applications, specifically coordinating autonomous submarines in contested maritime environments. The submarine project pushed my technical abilities to their absolute limits. Underwater environments presented communication challenges that aerial drones never faced, requiring me to develop entirely new approaches to swarm coordination. The mathematics involved fluid dynamics, acoustic engineering, and three-dimensional navigation algorithms that existed at the intersection of multiple engineering disciplines. Working 18-hour days in Blackstone's classified research facility, I began to understand why Rebecca Harrison had been so eager to recruit me. The defense industry wasn't just looking for engineers who could follow established procedures. They needed innovators who could solve problems that had never been encountered before. The breakthrough came on my 5th day at the facility. Instead of trying to maintain constant communication between submarine units, I developed a predictive algorithm that allowed each vessel to anticipate the movements and decisions of the entire swarm based on initial mission parameters and environmental conditions. The submarines could operate in complete radio silence while maintaining tactical coordination. Dr. Torres reviewed my work with an expression that had become familiar, amazement mixed with something approaching awe. Sarah, this is revolutionary. You've just solved a problem that the Navy has been struggling with for 20 years. Submarine swarm coordination has been theoretical until now, because nobody could figure out the communication limitations. Your predictive algorithm makes it practical. The Navy demonstration took place 2 weeks later at a facility in Newport, Rhode Island. I watched from a control room as my algorithms guided a fleet of autonomous submarines through complex tactical maneuvers without any external communication. Admiral Patricia Williams, the Navy's Director of Submarine Warfare, observed the exercise with growing excitement. How quickly can this technology be implemented fleet-wide? She asked Dr. Harrison after the demonstration concluded. With proper funding and resources, we could have prototype systems ready for field testing within 18 months, Harrison replied. The Admiral turned to me with an intensity that made me understand why she had risen to command submarine operations for the entire U.S. Navy. Miss Patterson, you've just changed the future of underwater warfare. This technology will give American submarines capabilities that no other nation can match. That evening, Dr. Harrison took me to dinner at a restaurant overlooking Newport Harbor. The conversation that followed would reshape my understanding of what was possible in my career. Sarah, I've been in this industry for 22 years, and I've never worked with anyone who demonstrates your combination of innovative thinking and practical application. You're not just solving engineering problems, you're revolutionizing how we approach military technology. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. I want to discuss your long-term career trajectory. After you graduate, we'd like you to lead your own research division, focused on autonomous systems coordination. You'd have a team of senior engineers, unlimited research funding, and direct access to Pentagon decision-makers. Lead my own division? But I'll only be 21 when I graduate. Age is irrelevant when you're producing results that change military doctrine. The Pentagon doesn't care how old you are if you can give American forces decisive technological advantages. The offer she outlined was staggering in its scope and responsibility. I would oversee a research budget of $50 million annually, manage a team of 30 engineers and computer scientists, and report directly to the Secretary of Defense on critical technology developments. The starting salary for this position would be $140,000, with performance bonuses that could double that amount based on project outcomes. I spent that night walking along the Newport waterfront, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered to me. 3 years earlier, I had been taking apart radios in my parents' basement while they predicted I would never amount to anything. Now I was being offered the opportunity to shape the future of American military technology before my 22nd birthday. The decision felt inevitable, but I knew that accepting it would fundamentally change not just my career trajectory, but my relationship with my family and my own sense of identity. I was about to become someone that the people who raised me would never fully understand or relate to. May 2021 brought a phone call that would accelerate my career trajectory beyond anything I could have imagined. I was in my apartment near Virginia Tech, cramming for final exams in my senior year, when Rebecca Harrison's voice cut through the static of my outdated phone. "Sarah, we need you in Arlington immediately. Something's happened that requires your specific expertise." The urgency in her tone was unmistakable. Dr. Harrison rarely called directly, preferring to communicate through official channels that maintained proper security protocols. Whatever was happening had disrupted normal procedures. "What kind of situation?" I asked, already reaching for my security clearance documentation. "I can't discuss details over an unsecured line, but it involves your submarine coordination algorithms. The Pentagon has fast-tracked a project that could determine the outcome of a developing international crisis." Within 6 hours, I was sitting in a classified briefing room at Blackstone headquarters, surrounded by military officials whose rank insignia indicated they made decisions that affected global stability. The tension in the room was palpable as Admiral Williams began explaining the situation. 3 days ago, intelligence agencies detected unusual submarine activity in the South China Sea. Chinese naval forces are using new coordination tactics that suggest they've developed their own autonomous swarm technology. Our current defensive capabilities are insufficient to counter this threat. She activated a wall-mounted display, showing satellite imagery of submarine formations that moved with precision and coordination, unlike anything previously observed in naval warfare. "Ms. Patterson, your predictive algorithms represent our best hope for maintaining maritime superiority in this region. We need you to adapt your technology for real-time tactical response within 72 hours. The challenge was unprecedented. Adapting laboratory algorithms for active military deployment typically required months of testing and refinement. But the geopolitical implications of the South China Sea situation demanded immediate action. I spent the next 3 days working around the clock with a team of 30 engineers, modifying my submarine coordination system to operate in contested waters while accounting for enemy countermeasures. The mathematics involved calculating thousands of variables simultaneously: ocean currents, acoustic signatures, enemy movement patterns, and tactical objectives that shifted by the hour. The field test took place in the Atlantic Ocean aboard the USS Colorado, a Virginia-class attack submarine equipped with experimental communication systems designed to interface with my algorithms. Standing in the submarine's control room, Watching my code guide a fleet of autonomous vessels through combat maneuvers felt like witnessing the future of naval warfare. Captain Jennifer Rodriguez, the Colorado's commanding officer, observed the exercise with growing amazement as the autonomous submarines executed complex tactical formations that would have been impossible to coordinate using traditional methods. "This is extraordinary," she told me as the exercise concluded. "Your system just demonstrated capabilities that could change the balance of power in every contested waterway on the planet." The South China Sea deployment remained classified, but the results spoke for themselves. Within 2 weeks, Chinese submarine activity in the region returned to normal patterns, suggesting that American technological superiority had been successfully demonstrated without firing a single shot. Admiral Williams called me into her temporary office at Blackstone with news that would reshape my understanding of my own importance to national security. "Sarah, your algorithms performed flawlessly under actual combat conditions. The Secretary of Defense has personally requested a briefing on your work, and the President's National Security Advisor wants to discuss long-term strategic applications." At 21 years old, I was being summoned to brief the highest levels of American government on technology that I had developed in college dormitories and corporate laboratories. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, my own parents had doubted my ability to succeed in engineering school. The Pentagon briefing took place in a conference room that had hosted discussions about every major military conflict of the past 50 years. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin listened intently as I explained the mathematical principles behind swarm coordination technology, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated his surprisingly deep understanding of military engineering. "Miss Patterson," he said after my presentation concluded, "your work represents the most significant advancement in naval warfare technology since the development of nuclear submarines. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have unanimously recommended that you be given expanded authority over autonomous systems development." The promotion offer that followed exceeded every career aspiration I had ever entertained. Blackstone was creating a new division, Advanced Autonomous Systems, with me as the director. I would oversee research budgets exceeding $100 million annually, manage a staff of over 200 engineers and scientists, and report directly to the Secretary of Defense on critical technology developments. The salary package reflected the position's importance: base compensation of $220,000, performance bonuses tied to successful project deployment, and stock options that could potentially make me a millionaire before my 25th birthday. But accepting the position meant embracing responsibilities that extended far beyond engineering challenges. I would be making decisions that affected American military strategy, international relations, and the lives of soldiers deployed around the world. Dr. Harrison walked me through the implications during a private meeting in her office. "Sarah, this position will make you one of the most influential people in American defense technology. Your recommendations will shape military doctrine for the next 20 years. The question is whether you're prepared for that level of responsibility." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. 3 years of college and internships had prepared me for technical challenges, but nothing had prepared me for the realization that my work could influence the outcome of international conflicts. That evening, I called Elena from my hotel room near the Pentagon. She was the only family member who had consistently supported my career choices, and I needed her perspective on the decision I was facing. "Elena, I'm being offered the opportunity to lead military technology development for the entire United States, but I'm terrified that I'm not ready for this level of responsibility." Her response surprised me with its clarity and wisdom. "Sarah, you've been ready for this your entire life. You just didn't know it yet. Remember when you were 16 and you took apart Dad's car stereo to figure out why it was making that weird noise? You didn't stop until you understood every component and how they worked together. That's exactly what you're doing now, just on a much larger scale." She paused before continuing. "Besides, if you don't take this position, who will? Some 40-year-old man who thinks the way things have always been done is the only way to do them? You see connections that other people miss. That's exactly what the military needs." I accepted the position the following Monday morning, officially becoming the youngest director in Blackstone Defense Corporation's history. The announcement made headlines in defense news and other industry publications, though my age remained a closely guarded detail due to security concerns. The Advanced Autonomous Systems Division launched with fanfare that was simultaneously public and secretive. We announced general research objectives while keeping specific projects classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. My first major initiative involved expanding autonomous coordination technology beyond submarines to include aircraft, ground vehicles, and satellite systems. The technical challenges were staggering. Creating algorithms that could coordinate hundreds of different types of military equipment operating in three-dimensional environments required mathematical models that pushed the boundaries of current computing technology. But the potential applications were revolutionary. Imagine autonomous supply convoys that could navigate hostile territory without human oversight, or satellite networks that could adapt to enemy jamming in real time. The breakthrough came 8 months into the project, when my team successfully demonstrated cross-platform coordination between drones, submarines, and ground vehicles during a joint military exercise in California. The systems operated as a unified tactical unit, sharing intelligence and adapting to changing conditions without human intervention. General Patricia Hayes, the Army's Chief of Staff, observed the demonstration with an expression that mixed excitement with concern about the implications of what she was witnessing. "This technology represents a fundamental shift in how we think about warfare," she told me afterward. "You've essentially created artificial military intelligence that can outthink human commanders in real time." The success of the cross-platform demonstration led to an invitation that would change my life permanently. The Secretary of Defense requested my presence at a National Security Council meeting, where President Biden would be briefed on autonomous warfare capabilities. Walking into the Situation Room at the White House felt like stepping into history. The same table where decisions about every major military conflict had been made was now hosting a discussion about technology that I had developed in university laboratories. President Biden listened intently as I explained the strategic implications of autonomous military systems, asking pointed questions about safeguards against technological failures and the potential for enemy nations to develop countermeasures. "Ms. Patterson," he said after my briefing concluded, "your work could give America decisive advantages in future conflicts, but it also raises profound ethical questions about the role of artificial intelligence in warfare. How do we ensure that these systems serve American interests without compromising our values?" The question revealed the complexity of the position I now occupied. I wasn't just developing military technology. I was helping to define how America would project power in an era where artificial intelligence could make life-and-death decisions without human oversight. The White House briefing led to my appointment as a special advisor to the Pentagon's Artificial Intelligence Task Force, a position that required me to split my time between research at Blackstone and policy development in Washington. At 22 years old, I was helping to write the rules that would govern autonomous warfare for the next generation. The personal toll of this rapid ascent became apparent during a visit home to Chicago in December 2021. My family had been following my career through news articles and social media posts, but the reality of my new position was difficult for them to comprehend. "Sarah, we saw an article that said you're advising the president on military technology," my mother said during dinner. "Is that really true?" "It's more complicated than that, but yes, I'm involved in high-level policy discussions about defense technology." My father looked up from his plate with an expression I had never seen before, something between pride and bewilderment. "I don't understand how this happened. 3 years ago, you were just our daughter who liked to tinker with electronics. Now you're working with the president?" The disconnect was profound. They were trying to reconcile their memories of the uncertain teenager who had left for college, with news reports about a defense industry executive who influenced national security policy. Marcus, now working as a sales representative for a Chicago-based company, struggled even more with the transformation. "It doesn't make sense," he said after dinner, when we were alone in the kitchen. "You were always the weird kid who took things apart. How did you end up more successful than everyone else in the family?" His question contained layers of resentment and confusion that reflected how dramatically our family dynamics had shifted. The daughter who had been written off as a failure was now earning more money than the rest of the family combined, while working on projects that influenced international relations. But the most significant change came during a conversation with Elena, who had graduated from art school and was struggling to establish herself as a professional artist. "Sarah, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm also worried about you. When was the last time you did something just for fun? When was the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about work?" Her concern was valid. The demands of my position had consumed my personal life completely. I worked 16-hour days, traveled constantly between Washington and Virginia, and hadn't maintained friendships outside of professional relationships in over a year. "I know it seems overwhelming," I told her, "but this work matters. The technology we're developing could prevent wars, protect American soldiers, and maintain peace through technological superiority." "But what about you?" she pressed. "What happens to Sarah Patterson when all this is over?" The question haunted me because I didn't have an answer. Somewhere in the transition from college student to defense industry executive, I had lost touch with who I was outside of my professional accomplishments. The person who had once taken apart radios for curiosity had become someone who developed military technology for national security. But there was no time for self-reflection. 3 days after returning from Chicago, I received a call that would accelerate my career trajectory even further. Blackstone's CEO was retiring, and the board of directors was considering me for promotion to general manager of the entire Advanced Systems division. At 22 years old, I was being offered the opportunity to become the youngest executive in the company's history, overseeing research budgets that exceeded $500 million annually, and managing operations that directly influenced American military capabilities worldwide. March 2022 arrived with a phone call that would cement my place in business history. I was reviewing quarterly budget reports for the Advanced Systems division when my assistant, Catherine Mills, knocked on my office door with an expression that mixed excitement with disbelief. "Miss Patterson, I have someone from Forbes magazine on line 1. They're requesting an interview for their annual 30 Under 30 Feet feature, Forbes." The magazine that had graced coffee tables in executive offices around the world for over a century. The publication that defined business success in America. They wanted to interview me. The conversation with Jennifer Walsh, Forbes' senior editor for the Defense and Aerospace section, revealed the scope of recognition I was about to receive. "Ms. Patterson, your work in autonomous military systems has caught the attention of our editorial board. We're not just considering you for the 30 Under 30 Feet list. We're planning to feature you as the cover story for our April issue on the future of American defense." The cover story. At 22 years old, I would be the youngest person ever featured on the cover of Forbes in the defense industry category. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family members who had predicted my failure would soon see my face on newsstands across the country. The interview process was extensive and meticulous. Forbes fact-checkers spent weeks verifying my accomplishments, speaking with Pentagon officials, Blackstone executives, and even my former professors at Virginia Tech. They wanted to ensure that the story they were telling was both accurate and compelling. Dr. Rebecca Harrison, who had become something of a mentor and advocate, provided a quote that would become the centerpiece of the article. "Sarah Patterson represents the future of American innovation. At an age when most people are just beginning their careers, she's already revolutionized how our military approaches technological challenges. She doesn't just solve problems, she reimagines entire systems." The photo shoot took place at Blackstone's headquarters in Arlington, with the photographer positioning me in front of displays showing autonomous vehicle prototypes and satellite communication arrays. Wearing a navy blue blazer and standing confidently beside technology that I had helped develop, I looked every inch the executive that I had somehow become. But the real validation came from the article's opening paragraph, which Forbes editor Michael Chen read to me over the phone before publication. At 22 years old, Sarah Patterson has accomplished what most engineers spend entire careers hoping to achieve. As the youngest general manager in Blackstone Defense Corporation's history, she oversees research budgets exceeding $500 million while developing military technologies that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. Her autonomous coordination systems have been deployed in classified operations across 3 continents, and her innovations have earned her direct access to the highest levels of American government. The article would go on to detail my journey from the Chicago teenager whose family doubted her abilities to the defense industry executive who briefed presidents on national security matters. But the most powerful section focused on the broader implications of my work for American military supremacy. Patterson's algorithms don't just coordinate individual military units. They represent a fundamental shift toward artificial intelligence that can outthink human commanders while maintaining ethical constraints that preserve American values. In an era where technological superiority determines military outcomes, Patterson's innovations could provide decisive advantages that maintain global stability through strength. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday morning in April 2022. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly with interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and every major network that covered defense industry news. The Blackstone communications team had to hire additional staff just to manage the media attention surrounding the Forbes cover story. But the call that mattered most came from an unexpected source: my mother, who had driven to 3 different stores in Chicago before finding a copy of the magazine. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling with emotions I had never heard from her before, "I'm looking at your picture on the cover of Forbes magazine. I don't know what to say." For the first time in our relationship, my mother seemed genuinely overwhelmed by one of my accomplishments. The woman who had thrown away my science fair project was now staring at evidence that her daughter had become one of the most influential people in American defense technology. "Mom, I know this is a lot to process. I know my career path isn't what you expected." "Expected?" she laughed, but it was a sound filled with regret rather than humor. "Sarah, I spent years telling you to be realistic about your limitations. I was so wrong about everything. You didn't have limitations. You had dreams that were bigger than anything I could understand." The conversation lasted over an hour, covering years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities for support. My mother apologized for doubting my abilities, for discouraging my ambitions, and for failing to recognize the determination that had driven me to succeed, despite their skepticism. My father's reaction was characteristically more reserved but equally profound. When I called him that evening, he listened quietly as I described the media attention and professional opportunities that were emerging from the Forbes recognition. "Sarah," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. I spent so many years thinking I was protecting you from disappointment by encouraging you to be realistic. But you were never meant for realistic expectations. You were meant for something extraordinary." Marcus took several days to call, and when he did, the conversation revealed how fundamentally our family dynamics had shifted. "I've been thinking about this for a week," he said. "Do you remember when we were kids and you used to take apart every electronic device in the house? Mom and Dad would get so frustrated, but you always put everything back together better than it was before. I remember them being angry about the messes I made. That's what I thought too back then. But looking at this Forbes article, I realize you weren't making messes. You were learning how the world worked. And now you're using that knowledge to build things that protect our country." The most emotional response came from Elena, who had driven to Chicago specifically to celebrate with our parents when the magazine was published. "Sarah, I'm sitting here with Mom and Dad looking at your picture on this cover, and we're all crying. Not because we're sad, but because we're so proud and so sorry that we didn't see this coming." She paused, collecting herself before continuing. "You know what the best part is? The article talks about how you've stayed true to your values despite all this success. You're still the same person who wanted to understand how things worked and make them better." The Forbes recognition opened doors that I hadn't expected. Within weeks, I received speaking invitations from MIT, Stanford, and Harvard Business School. Defense contractors from allied nations requested consultations on autonomous systems development. The State Department asked me to participate in international conferences on military technology cooperation. But the opportunity that truly surprised me came from an unexpected source. The Pentagon's newly created Office of Strategic Technology Innovation wanted me to serve as their youngest ever senior advisor, a position that would involve shaping American defense policy for the next decade. General Patricia Hayes, who had observed my cross-platform coordination demonstration, called personally to extend the invitation. "Sarah, we're creating a new position specifically for you. The role would involve advising the Joint Chiefs of Staff on emerging technologies while continuing your research at Blackstone. You'd essentially become the bridge between private innovation and military implementation." The salary and benefits package was staggering, $400,000 annually. plus security clearances that would give me access to classified programs across every branch of the military. More importantly, the position would make me one of the most influential voices in American defense strategy before my 25th birthday. But accepting the role meant embracing a level of responsibility that would define the rest of my career. I would be helping to determine how America projected power in an increasingly complex global environment, making decisions that could affect the lives of millions of people worldwide. The announcement of my Pentagon appointment made headlines in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and every major publication that covered defense industry news. The articles consistently emphasized my age and the unprecedented nature of my rapid ascent through the ranks of the American defense establishment. Patterson's appointment represents a generational shift in how the Pentagon approaches technological innovation, wrote Defense News senior correspondent Michael Rodriguez. Her algorithms are already deployed in classified operations worldwide, and her influence on military doctrine will likely persist for decades. The personal cost of this recognition became apparent during a family gathering in Chicago to celebrate my 23rd birthday. Sitting around the same dinner table where they had once predicted my failure, my parents struggled to reconcile their memories with the reality of who I had become. "It's surreal," my mother admitted over dessert. "3 years ago, we were worried about whether you'd graduate from college. Now we're reading about you in national magazines and watching you on television discussing military policy." My father nodded in agreement. "I keep thinking about all the times we told you to be realistic, to consider practical careers. We had no idea that what seemed impossible to us was actually inevitable for you." But the conversation that truly brought everything full circle happened later that evening, when Elena and I were alone in my old bedroom. She had been studying the Forbes article, paying particular attention to the sections about my early life and family background. "Sarah, there's something I want to ask you. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom and Dad had believed in you from the beginning? If they had encouraged your electronics projects instead of discouraging them?" The question touched on something I had been avoiding for months. Would my journey have been different if my family had supported my ambitions from the start? Would I have achieved the same level of success without the motivation that came from proving everyone wrong? "I think about it sometimes," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I would have developed the same drive if success had come easily." The doubt and skepticism forced me to become completely self-reliant, to trust my own judgment even when everyone else thought I was wrong. Elena smiled with the wisdom of someone who had watched our family's transformation from the inside. "Maybe that's the real lesson here. You didn't succeed despite their doubt. You succeeded because you refused to let their limitations become your limitations." The Forbes recognition had transformed not just my career trajectory, but my family's understanding of what was possible. The people who had once seen me as the unsuccessful middle child now struggled to comprehend how their daughter had become one of the most influential figures in American defense technology. But for me, the magazine cover represented something simpler and more profound. It was proof that the curious teenager who had taken apart radios in a Chicago basement had been right to trust her instincts, right to pursue dreams that seemed impossible to everyone around her, and right to believe that understanding how things worked was the first step toward making them work better. Standing in that boardroom at Blackstone, looking at the Forbes magazine on the conference table, I realized that the journey from family disappointment to national recognition had taught me the most important lesson of all. The only limitations that truly matter are the ones you accept for yourself. The 23 pairs of eyes in that boardroom were no longer looking at someone who had defied expectations. They were looking at someone who had redefined what expectations could be. And that transformation had started with a simple refusal to believe that being ordinary was the only option available to me. The girl who had been told she would never amount to anything had become a woman who was reshaping the future of American military technology. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from meeting other people's expectations, but from having the courage to exceed them so dramatically that they have no choice but to reconsider everything they thought they knew about what's possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.